The moment my father-in-law pointed at me across the conference table and said, "She doesn't belong in this room," I didn't flinch. I'd been preparing for that exact sentence for 3 years. Let me back up. I met my husband at university in Ottawa. He was studying business. I was in architecture. We were 22 and completely broke and completely in love, and when he brought me home to meet his family for the first time, I wore the nicest dress I owned, a navy wrap dress I bought on sale at Winners, and his mother looked me up and down in the doorway of their Rosedale home and smiled in a way that wasn't quite a smile. "So you're the one," she said. I didn't know what that meant then. I do now. His family ran a mid-sized commercial real estate development firm in Toronto. Nothing flashy, but solid. The kind of company that had been quietly building suburban strip malls and office parks since the 80s. The kind his grandfather had started with one property and a handshake, and his father had grown into something worth real money. My husband was the only son. There was also a daughter, his younger sister, who had married well and moved to Vancouver and called home every Sunday and was, as far as his mother was concerned, the sun around which everything orbited. I was a disturbance in that orbit. It started small. The holiday dinners, where my input on anything was gently redirected. The family meetings I wasn't invited to because I wasn't technically a shareholder. The way my mother-in-law would call my husband and he'd go quiet and then come to me later and say, "She just worries, that's all. She's old-fashioned." I believed him the first time. I believed him the 5th time. By the 20th time, I had started keeping a notebook. Not out of spite. Out of survival. My own career was going well. I joined a small architectural firm in Midtown and was working on commercial and mixed-use projects, and somewhere around year 2, I started noticing things. Patterns in how certain development firms structured their bids. Gaps in the market nobody was servicing. I'd come home and talk to my husband about it, and his eyes would light up and he'd say we should do something about it, together, someday, and I believe that too. The thing about marrying into a family business is that you don't realize how much you've been shaped by proximity until you try to step away. By the time I was 28, I had absorbed 6 years of commercial real estate strategy the way you absorb a language when you live in a country long enough. I didn't think of it as expertise, it was just dinner conversation. It was just listening. His family thought of me as the girl who had married their son. That was the whole of my identity to them. A marital appendage, a placeholder, a name on an emergency contact form. Then my husband got sick. It wasn't sudden, but it felt that way. A diagnosis in February, a second opinion in March, and by April we were rearranging our entire lives around treatment schedules and insurance paperwork and the specific exhaustion that comes from watching someone you love fight for their own body. He was 31, I was 30. We had a mortgage in Leslieville and a dog named after a street in our neighborhood and a future we had been carefully assembling piece by piece, and all of it went into suspension. His family descended like weather. His mother moved into the guest room. His father came by every evening and sat at our kitchen table and talked about the company in a way that very deliberately excluded me, as though I were a hired nurse who happened to live there. His sister flew in from Vancouver and took over the kitchen and spoke to me with a specific kind of warmth that people use when they're managing someone they consider fragile. I was not fragile. I was exhausted. There's a difference. What nobody told me, what nobody in that family ever acknowledged, was that during those 8 months, I was the one handling everything. The insurance claims, the short-term disability paperwork, the medical expense tracking. I kept working because we needed my salary. I managed the mortgage payments and negotiated a deferral with the bank when things got tight. I coordinated between 3 different specialists and kept a binder that our GP later told me was the most organized patient record she'd ever seen. I did all of this while his family sat at my kitchen table and made me feel like a guest in my own marriage. My husband got better. Slowly, then all at once, the way recovery sometimes works. By the following spring, he was back at work, and his family exhaled collectively, and something shifted. His mother called me resilient once, like she was awarding me a certificate. Then my father-in-law asked my husband to come back to the firm full-time. They wanted him to take on a senior development role, which was what they'd always planned, and my husband said yes because of course he did, and for a few months things felt almost normal. Almost. The first sign that something had changed came during a Sunday dinner in Rosedale. My father-in-law mentioned a commercial project they were pursuing, a mixed-use development in Mississauga, the kind of thing I'd worked on professionally, and I offered a thought about the zoning variance they'd need. It wasn't an intrusion, it was just conversation. My father-in-law looked at me for a long moment and then turned back to my husband and continued talking as if I hadn't spoken. My husband did not correct him. I noticed that too. The second sign came when I learned from my husband in passing, almost apologetically, that his family had added him to the corporate shareholder register. A formal restructuring. He now held a 30% stake alongside his father, his mother, and his sister, who held the remaining shares split between them. There was no mention of me. I asked him quietly after the kids were in bed, we had a daughter by then, just over 2 years old, whether that seemed right to him. He said it was complicated. He said his family had built the company before us. He said it was just a formality. I went to the kitchen and stood at the window and watched the backyard for a long time. That was the night I started making different plans. I want to be clear about something. I am not a person who operates from anger. Anger is loud and obvious, and it makes you careless. What I felt in that kitchen was something quieter and more precise, the particular clarity that comes when you finally see a situation exactly as it is, without the softening effect of hope. What I saw was this. I had spent years contributing to a family and a household and an orbit of relationships that did not consider me a real participant. I had supported my husband through the hardest year of his life, financially and logistically and emotionally, and the reward for that was to be quietly omitted from the structures that mattered. And the man I had married, who I still loved, genuinely, who I believe loved me, had decided that keeping the peace with his family was worth more than standing beside me. So I stopped waiting for him to stand beside me. I stood beside myself. I had been freelancing on the side for 2 years by that point. Small projects, referrals from colleagues, nothing that disrupted my primary employment. But I had also been watching the development landscape in Ontario very carefully, and I had seen something that I don't think anyone in my father-in-law's firm had noticed. There was a corridor of secondary commercial properties running through parts of Hamilton and Burlington, aging strip plazas, underperforming retail blocks, the kind of properties that had been sitting on family balance sheets since the 90s and were now being quietly divested as the original owners aged out. The asking prices were below replacement cost. The locations, once overlooked, were being reconsidered as transit-oriented development pressure moved outward from Toronto. I had been buying them. Not personally, I didn't have that kind of capital. But I had spent 14 months building a relationship with the private equity contact I'd met at an industry conference in Vaughan. A woman named, I'll just call her my business partner, because that's what she became, who had access to institutional capital and was looking for someone who understood Ontario's development pipeline from the inside. We structured a small fund. I was the operating partner. She handled the capital raise. By the time my father-in-law omitted my name from the shareholder register, I had quietly acquired, through our fund, 4 commercial properties in the Hamilton corridor. My husband didn't know. His family certainly didn't know. Nobody knew, because I had been very careful and because I had learned from years of observation that in rooms where people dismiss you, you are also invisible. And invisibility, I had discovered, is an extraordinary advantage. I kept going to Sunday dinners. I kept nodding at my father-in-law's stories. I kept being managed by my mother-in-law's warmth. I kept loving my husband and raising my daughter and showing up to every family obligation as though nothing had changed. Meanwhile, our fund grew. A 5th property. A 6th. We completed our first rezoning and sold to a developer at a margin that made my business partner send me a bottle of Niagara ice wine with a note that said simply, "More of this." The thing that ended the marriage wasn't dramatic. That's the part that still surprises me. There was no affair, no blowout fight, no single catastrophic moment. There was just an evening in October. Our daughter was asleep. The house was quiet when my husband sat down at the kitchen table and told me that his family thought it would be better if I stepped back from appearing at company events, not permanently, just while they were in some delicate negotiations with a new investor. They felt my background was a mismatch with the image they were cultivating. I looked at him for a long time. "And what do you think?" I asked. He looked at the table. "I think it might just be easier if you—" I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. I moved into a rental in the East End with my daughter 2 weeks later. I filed for separation. My husband's family hired a lawyer who sent me a letter within the month suggesting that, given my limited financial contribution to the household during a period of significant family investment, I should expect a modest settlement. My own lawyer, a woman I had researched very carefully, a family law specialist in Toronto with a reputation for precision, read the letter and raised one eyebrow and said, "They don't know what you have, do they?" "No," I said. "They don't." The mediation sessions were scheduled for a Tuesday in March in a boardroom at a law office in the financial district. I wore a gray blazer over a white shirt and flat shoes because I wanted to be comfortable. My mother-in-law was there, which was unusual. It was a separation proceeding, not a family reunion, but apparently she had insisted. She sat next to her son with her hands folded and looked at me the way she always had, with that smile that wasn't quite a smile. My father-in-law arrived late. He walked in, looked around the table, and then looked at me and said, "She doesn't belong in this room." He said it to his lawyer, not even to me, as if I were furniture that had been incorrectly delivered. His lawyer, a senior partner whose name I recognized from industry directories, glanced at me briefly and then back at his client and said something in a low voice. My father-in-law shrugged. "She's an architect. She makes what, 80, 90,000 a year? This is a business matter." My lawyer set a document on the table. It was a corporate registry filing from the Ontario Business Registry, a holding company, registered 3 years prior with a listed address in Hamilton. Attached to it was a property schedule. 6 commercial properties, a completed rezoning certificate, a development agreement with a regional municipality, and a financial summary that listed the current estimated portfolio value. The number was just under $9 million. The room went very quiet. My father-in-law looked at the document. Then he looked at me. His face did something complicated. I watched the shift happen in real time, the way you watch someone revise a calculation they were certain about. His lawyer leaned over and read the document and then sat back in his chair and said, quietly, Is this your client?" My lawyer said, "It is." My mother-in-law's hands unfolded on the table. My husband was looking at me in a way I hadn't seen before, not with anger, with something more like awe and grief and the specific recognition of a person who is understanding, all at once, everything they missed. I didn't feel triumph. That surprised me. I had expected to feel something sharp and satisfying, the way you feel when you've been right about something for a long time and you finally get to prove it. But what I felt was something much quieter, a kind of settled, calm sadness for the version of us that might have existed if anyone in that room had ever thought to include me. The mediation took 4 sessions. My father-in-law did not speak directly to me after that first day. My mother-in-law, in the 3rd session, asked my lawyer if she could address me directly, and my lawyer looked at me, and I nodded, and my mother-in-law said, in a voice that was smaller than I had ever heard from her, "I didn't know." "I know," I said. That was the point. The settlement was fair. My lawyer made sure of it, not punitive, not theatrical, but precise. My husband and I handled our daughter's life with more care than we had handled our marriage, which is probably how it should be. She spends weekdays with me in a house I bought in the Glebe in Ottawa, close to good schools and a park she loves. and weekends with her father, who is trying, I think, genuinely to understand where things went wrong. His family still runs their firm. I heard through a mutual contact that they eventually landed the Mississauga project. I hope they do well with it. My business partner and I closed our seventh acquisition last fall. We're looking at a larger raise now, something that would let us move into development rather than just acquisition and repositioning. There's a corridor in the Waterloo region that looks to my eye the way the Hamilton corridor looked 4 years ago. A little overlooked, a little underpriced, full of potential that nobody prominent has noticed yet. I notice things. I always have. It just took a room full of people deciding I was invisible for me to understand what a gift that actually was. My daughter asked me last week why I work so much. She's 4 now. She said it very seriously, sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of toast. I told her I was building something. She thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "For me?" I said yes, and I meant it completely. But I also meant it for the 22-year-old in the navy dress who stood in a doorway in Rosedale and didn't yet know that the smile she received wasn't a welcome, and who built something extraordinary, anyway, in the spaces where nobody thought to look.